So I'm here to talk a little bit about how can we create this idea of a liberated future while we're dealing with a society which is in the grips of trauma. So before I get started, I want to do some acknowledgements. So first off, I want to talk about the land that we're standing on. So we're standing on the land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This land has been stolen, this land was never ceded, will never be ceded likely. This always will be and always was Aboriginal land. And I think it's important, so when we say that, it can often become a bit of a rote thing, you know, you say it over and over again and it loses all its meaning. I think it's important to actually reflect on what that means. And what that means to me is that I am a beneficiary of a violent act and continuous act of colonization. So colonization never stopped, colonization never had an end point. Colonization does not finish. We are not post-colonization. And this is a global thing. So earlier in the year I visited Palestine and I saw how the ongoing oppression of Palestinian people plays out by Israeli forces. And then I came back to Australia and I realised that it's not so much different. It's not so far removed. Indigenous people are similarly oppressed, as are so many colonised groups across the world. So I think when we're talking about acknowledging the land that we're on, we're acknowledging that we are benefiting from the ongoing suppression, oppression, and marginalisation of Indigenous people. Another acknowledgement I'd like to make is acknowledgement for the people who aren't in this room. So we are animal allies, we are animal advocates, yet so often we inhabit spaces which are exclusionary towards the very people we are speaking on behalf of and fighting for. We inhabit spaces where very few species who are oppressed by humans can actually inhabit in a safe or legal way. So we're in this building, we're in this human-made building, and we're talking about how to centre animals, and I think we can't really centre animals until we remove ourselves from our spaces, remove ourselves from human comfort zones and enter their spaces. And I think that was talked about really beautifully in the last talk when talking about kangaroos and how can you learn to share spaces with these animals and learn to communicate with them and understand their struggle. So animals are active participants in their own resistance. And I think we really need to reflect on that and think about who we're here on behalf of and who we're here to brainstorm, like whose liberation are we fighting for? So with that being done, I do want to say before I get started that I'm going to talk about some heavy topics today, including, to be honest, I haven't written this talk, so I'm not entirely sure what's including, but anything under the umbrella of trauma could be included. So if you feel like this is something that might be a bit too real for you, feel free to leave the space at any time. And everyone's just going to assume you're not going to the toilet, so don't feel that pressure to be, to stay in a space when you're feeling uncomfortable. So with that, I'm going to get started. So, like I said, my name's Harley. For the past 3 years, I've been active in the animal justice space as an activist, as an ally, as a storyteller, and as an organiser. So, alongside that, for the last 6 or so years, I've been going through my own personal struggle with depression, with anxiety, with eating disorders, and with a lot of other things that have made my brain basically a battle zone. So about mid last year, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and it's a really commonly misunderstood kind of thing that's happening in people's brains. So for those of you who don't know, the kind of characteristics of borderline are that it's characterized by hypersensitivity, it's characterized by extreme emotional kind of highs and unstable relationships, all of which I had, all of which I struggled to identify with. So when I got that diagnosis, I didn't really understand it, so I did a lot of research. And what I found out was that there's two kind of causes that are usually associated with borderline. One of them is family history, and one of them is trauma. The family history I got. So I look back through my family and I'm like, yep, it's there. So, my mum's in the audience actually. If you look at her face right now, you can kind of see that we're just like, as soon as we learn about that family history, we're just like, oh my God, this explains so much. But my family's great, by the way, I love them. But the trauma thing, I felt such an imposter. I was like, I can't have this diagnosis, I have no trauma. I live, a great life. And then it was only really this year when I went through probably the biggest breakdown I've ever experienced, that I started to understand that this does not come from nowhere. So through the help of an existential psychotherapist, I started to delve into my own trauma and started to realize that what was happening for me now, what was happening in my brain, what was happening in my body, it was arising from things in my childhood that had long since been pushed into a box in my mind. So I started to realize my own trauma. And through that, I became a little bit obsessed with trauma, if I'm being honest. I started doing a lot of reading about really, horrible periods of history, which generated kind of mass events of trauma. I started reading about the Holocaust, about wars, about what's happening in the Middle East, about colonization. And I started creating this map in my mind, this landscape of trauma that we all live within. So trauma is not easily defined, and I'm not going to try and define it. It is nuanced, it is individual, it is intergenerational, it is societal, it is endemic. Trauma almost can't not exist at the stage of life that we're in. So if we think about it, the land that we're standing on is home to at least 80,000 years of continuous civilization. Across the world, there are so many other examples of civilization that have existed for so long. Humankind has existed for so long. And if we think about recent and ongoing research that shows the intergenerational aspects of trauma, imagine what we are carrying as this generation. Humans have lived through horrible events. Humans have lived through wars. Humans have lived through the mass killings of people, like people's communities. Humans have lived through and uncovered horrible atrocities, as all of us have. We've realized what's happening to other animals in our spaces. We've realized the kind of systemic oppression. We've created systemic oppressions and then understood them and tried to dismantle them and failed to dismantle them time and time again. We are living embattled by trauma. And I think it is rare, maybe even impossible, for anyone living today to not have some element of trauma inside them. So when I decided to do this talk, I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about this idea of how can we build a liberated future when we're all grieving? How can we build a liberated future when there is so much loss and pain inside every single one of us, even those of us who live within privilege, let alone those of us who are living as marginalized, oppressed individuals of any species? And to start off with, I didn't really know what to do. I brainstormed a lot of ideas. And then I realized, who am I to teach any of you about trauma? I'm not an expert. I understand my own trauma to a limited extent, learning more. I, to a limited extent, even more limited extent, understand other people's that I've read about, that I've taken the time to educate myself on. But I can never truly understand. What I did realize, time and time again, through more reading that I did, through more conversations that I had, there were three things that kept coming up for me. And I've started to call them kind of the 3 C's. And maybe a couple of years ago, I would have called them the cure for trauma. But now I don't think that there is a possibility of curing trauma, but there is ways of learning to live with it. There are ways of learning to live around it. And as many people who are dealing with trauma can attest to, in many ways, it can make you a stronger person. It can make you more empathetic. It can make you more understanding. It can make you able to connect to things that you before had no comprehension of. So I don't think trauma makes us weak. I think it makes us incredibly strong. And I think when we're talking about movements for liberation, movements for justice, we need to understand our own trauma. We need to find ways to heal so that we can use that strength to become the voices that we need to be to champion these movements. So these 3 C's that I see as that way forward, these 3 C's that have come up time and time again with so many different people I've talked to, so many different oppressed groups. These 3 C's are community, connection, and creativity. So again, when I was thinking about doing this, I thought about how can I talk about these 3 C's? How can I embody them? How can I bring them into this space? And I realized that there's not much that I can do just talking at you. These are embodied practices. community, connection, creativity. They're all things that theoretical understanding can only get you so far. So this is a workshop. It's also a bit of an experiment. So what we're going to do today is create a space to create and allow room for those 3 C's to develop. And what my hope is to create a bit of a space for healing. So I've got some things, and I've got some helpers. So what I'm going to do is set up a couple of zones inside. I was going to go outside, but it's a bit cold, so let's stay inside. So I'm going to set up a couple of zones. So over here, I'm going to have a rest zone. It's going to have blankets, it's going to have pillows, and I ask that if you do decide to go to this zone, that you keep any conversation to like a whisper, a quiet whisper. And that's just a zone for anyone who wants to rest, to sleep, to meditate, to just be, to exist, to be warm, comfortable, and for physical touch if that's something that you want, consensually of course. I'm going to have a zone over here, which is our music zone. So we've got a guitar, kindly brought by Jordan, and I don't play the guitar. I'm hoping someone plays the guitar, because otherwise there's just going to be a guitar sitting in the space. But you know, someone can pluck at the strings. Music is music. And that's a place if you want to sing, if you want to play the guitar, if you want to play other music, if you just want to be and exist and talk and create. Then we're going to move out into this area where we had morning tea earlier, and I'm going to have 2 more zones in there. One of them, I'm going to be there, and that's going to be a place for conversation. Going to be a place to share experiences of trauma if that's something you want to do. Going to be a place to ask questions, to share things that have helped you in the past. And yeah, I'll be there to answer any questions about what I've learned. And then finally, the one I'm most excited about. So my mum is here. My mum's a trained visual artist, and we've got a whole bunch of art supplies as well as some paper, and my mum's going to be facilitating a session for anyone who wants to just be a bit artistic, create something, talk about art, talk about healing through art. So yeah, can I invite Delan, Mum and Kiana down just to help me set up? And then once everything's set up, just feel free to move between the sections. You're not limited to the first one you go to, and just enjoy.